Steve Farber. Has been a great mentor of mine for 5 years after I discovered some of his great writing and books. And he is recently did a combined version. And I think the seminal one is The Radical Leap. And that one actually has been recognized publicly as one of the best 100 business books of all time. And it really is. And he's recently has made a radical leap of his own into a venture called Extreme Leadership. And it's an organization, and I quote, devoted to the cultivation and development of extreme leaders in the business community. And if there's anybody I know that would know how to do that and talk about it and preach about it, and all the times that I've seen him, and some of you have seen him, and I know some of you have not, it's Steve. And he's a leader himself, and I think this August he's going to have, what's it called, the Extreme Leadership Summit in San Diego, and I'm sure that's going to be fantastic. So I would love, it's my pleasure to once again introduce my friend, Steve Farber.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry. Awesome. Great job. Thank you. I've got one word to start the afternoon. Pivot. Start drinking, boy. There you go. Thank you very much. You know, I've been coming to SOBCon since the very beginning, and every year it's become a kind of a tradition for me to be here. More than kind of a tradition. This is the one conference that I go to every year for what I think are obvious reasons for everybody that's here. But what's become kind of interesting for me personally is that every year, whenever I speak here, I get an assignment. I get an assignment from Liz that goes something like, "Here's what I'd like you to talk about this year." And it's always very interesting because to me, my first response is usually, why? Why me? So this year she asked me to talk about how to build community, how to build network, and my question, of course, was, why me? I mean, why not have Brogan talk about that, or Gerbishak talk about that, or why not have you talk about that, for God's sake? I mean, look at what's going on in this room here today. And what's interesting to me is that whenever she asks me a question like that, she forces me to look back on my own experience and try to extract the lessons from it. And as it turns out, I've learned a few things. I want to share with you what I've learned about this thing called building community, building network. And listen, I use those terms interchangeably. I don't know if that's technically accurate or not. But to me, it is. Maybe that's a reflection of how much I know or don't know about the subject. But she also asked me to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've talked about here before. All right? So just fair warning, I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts on this idea of building community, but I'm also going to sprinkle it with some of the, I don't know, greatest hits or whatever. But it all ties together. And let me start the whole conversation with my all-time favorite quote from one of my mentors, a guy named Terry Pierce, who's one of the finest executive coaches on the planet. And he was reflecting on his work in helping leaders come to grips with the reality of what it means to lead. Come to grips with the reality of what it means when your position or title smacks right up against the wall of actually having to do the act of leadership. And I think Terry's words speak for themselves. Here's the way Terry put it. He said, "There are many people who think they want to be matadors only to find themselves in the ring with 2,000 pounds of bull bearing down on them and then discovered that what they really wanted was to wear tight pants and hear the crowd roar." Now, the minute you find yourself in the ring facing down 2,000 pounds of literal or figurative bull, that's when you realize this isn't about the accolades, this is not about the status, it's not about the applause. I've just put myself at risk in order to do this. Therefore, it begs a question, do I really want to do this? And the this that we want to ask ourselves, we really want to do, is this idea of building a network. Do we really want to do this? I mean, it sounds great. It sounds like, you know, it's what we all want, right? We all have these visions of having millions of people following us and you know, hanging on every tweet and going to every link that we offer them. But do we really want to pursue that sort of a thing? What does that entail? So let me share with you my thoughts on this. And I want to start with a little bit of a reference back to what we talked about for those of you that were here last year. We talked last year about this idea of building your body of work. What does it take to create your body of work? So for our purposes here today, let me just define it like this. Your body of work is everything that you've done. It's all the articles that you've written, it's the people that you've met, it's the businesses that you've had, it's the influence that you've had on your world. It's not just artists, it's not just writers that have bodies of work, we all do. So it occurs to me that the core of building any kind of community comes down to the body of work that you have. Is our body of work something that people are going to be interested in? Is it something that people are going to gravitate towards? So it's building your body of work, and everybody in this room, whether you've used this terminology or not, or whether you've thought about it in this way or not, everybody in this room, we're all in the business of not just building a body of work, but broadcasting it, right? So broadcasting the body of work is essentially saying, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's my purpose, here's my mission, pick whatever terminology you want to use from the last day and a half, here's the influence that I want to have on the world, here's the value that I have for you. This is who I am. That's the broadcast. And when you start to broadcast your body of work, people are going to respond. My body of work, I wanted to give you just a glimpse of what my body of work is, which has been represented in, I'm not sure if it's 3 books or 4 books. It used to be 3, and now it's 2, actually. It used to be, I don't know. The Radical Leap, the Radical Edge, Greater Than Yourself, that's 3, plus the Radical Leap Re-Energized is 4, except that the Radical Leap Re-Energized is the combination of the Radical Leap and the Radical Edge, so that brings us back to 2. So I don't know, something like that. But I've been writing about leadership, speaking about leadership for 20 years, and I can summarize my body of work. And I want to share this with you, not just to talk about my body of work, but I think you'll see how it plays out in the act of building community. My body of work comes down to this word, that the act of leadership is fundamentally an act of love. That cultivating love not only is it not inappropriate in the context of leadership, it's at the very core of what great leadership is. And not only that, it's at the very foundation of any great, thriving, competitive business. So my body of work, my platform has been in talking to hardcore business people, for a couple of decades, that love is something that you should bring with you to work. And what's been really fascinating to me since I got on the soapbox about this maybe 12 years ago or so is that every day I see it played out in innumerable ways. So I was just recently, it was last summer actually, I was out in Boston, and I was out there to speak at a senior executive team meeting for a company called Sovereign Bank. All right? Now I live in San Diego. Sovereign Bank is a regional bank, so I'd never even heard of Sovereign Bank, let alone been in one. So I did my usual kind of preparation calls. You can talk to a couple of the senior executives of the company, learned a little bit about their culture. But I arrived in Boston a day early, which doesn't usually happen for me. And I took advantage of the day to take care of some business that I was transacting back at home, which required having some documents notarized, right? So I went down to the concierge of the hotel, asked for a notary. Do you guys have one here? And I said, the concierge said to me, no, we don't have a notary here, but it just so happens there's a Sovereign Bank branch office right across the street, and they have a notary public there. So I said, cool, this is great. It gives me a chance to do a little field research, do like a ghost customer kind of a thing. So I strolled across the street. I walked into this bank, and it was a small branch, right? 2 tellers sitting side by side. So I walked up to teller number 1. I said, listen, I hear you guys have a notary. I'm looking for a notary public. And she said, oh, that would be Rosella. And she pointed to teller number 2. So I said, okay, cool. So I stepped over to Rosella's window, and we started in the usual, notary business, stamping this, signing that, sealing this, and the usual kind of small talk that goes along with it. Just small talk. So I just want you guys to understand, I didn't say anything to Rosella about what I was going to be doing the following afternoon, speaking to her boss's 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 boss or whatever. I didn't say anything to Rosella about my philosophy of leadership. It was just, transactional, small talk kind of stuff. And when she stamped the last stamp or signed the last thing, I asked her the same question that I've asked any number of notaries over the years. What do I owe you? And she said, you don't owe me anything. This is just a service that we provide to our customers here. I said, well, that's really cool. I said, but you know, I'm not a customer. And she said, maybe you will be someday. I thought, that's what I said. Well, that's pretty cool. And then I was struck, if I could say this about myself, I was struck with a flash of brilliance. It just came out of nowhere. I just asked her a question, which in retrospect seems obvious. I said, hey, Rosella, would you mind telling me, what's it like to work here at Sovereign Bank? And I'm telling you guys, I'm not exaggerating this. There was no hesitation. Her face lit up, and she said, I love it. I love it. And she started telling me about the other banks that she'd worked for, and about how their culture was so different. And she came to work at Sovereign. It was a very supportive culture, and she, you know, how she feels about her customers. Now, I have this odd habit when I'm talking to people and they're telling me things that I think are really relevant, you know, to my work. I start taking notes, right? So I'm actually literally taking notes, like on the back of the documents that I just signed. And so I want to share with you some of her words. I wrote these down word for word. This is what she said. She said, I love my customers and I get great pleasure from serving them, so I am happy. And then she explained to me how, you know, she loves her customers, so they love her in return, and on it goes, and it just kind of feeds on itself. I said, so, you know, I'm you know, scribbling furiously, and I said, oh, that's so cool. I said, hey, Rosella, would you mind if I quoted you on that? And she said, would you like me to notarize it? What do you think I said? Yes. Yes, I would, and she did. There you go. So that's the back of her business card that she stamped. And of course, you're looking at it on the slide here, because the first thing I did, of course, was I took a picture of it so I could share it the next day with that senior management team. And the boss was so blown away by that he walked across the street, said thank you to Rosella, and on and on and on it goes, right? Don't tell me that love has no place in business. To say that love has no place in business is insane. In fact, it's just damn good business as far as I'm concerned. So let me net it all out for you like this. This is really what it comes down to for me. It's you can consider it to be the extreme leader, which is just my way of saying, you know, the real leader, a person who steps up to change the nature of things for the better. The extreme leader's credo, I guess you could call it. And there's 3 parts to this. Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. I have shared this at every SOBCon that I've spoken at. I share this with every group that I speak to, every chance that I get, because this represents the core of my body of work, right? Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. Do what you love it's the foundation. It's where we get our juice from. But it's not enough. I mean, there was a book that was written a number of years ago. What was it called? Do what you love yeah, do what you love and the money will follow, or the fortunes will fall on your head, something like that. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But here's what I'm convinced of. Doing what you love is not the whole story. It's not enough. I mean, one could argue that criminals are doing what they love too. That doesn't qualify them for, you know, extreme leadership in my book. But yet it is the juice. So it's do what you love in the service of people. That's the moral context, the ethical context. And it's also the business context for this, right? Do what you love in the service of people, but not to serve them just because we're obliged to, not to check it off of a to-do list, and not to serve them in some minimal sort of a way so we feel that we've met the requirements. It's to serve them in a way, like you do, Mark, to serve them in a way so that the impact on them is so significant that they love what we do for them in return. Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. So this is what I've been on my soapbox about. And what I found is this, that this was nothing that I did with any kind of conscious intent. Please understand. It was a natural occurrence. When I began to write and when I began to speak on this and all of the principles and practices and subtleties and nuances and permutations that come out of this, people started to respond. They started to respond in some pretty significant ways. So I broadcasted it. They responded to me. Here's the way I was used to having people respond, because it was the way that I grew up. I grew up in the, you know, professionally anyway, I grew up in the training and development and consulting industry, right? So when I go and give a speech, and people respond to it, they come up to me afterwards and they say, thank you, that was really nice, I really enjoyed that, you know, and I say, thank you, and then, you know, we say goodbye. But what's happened, of course, over the years is the way that people respond and how they started to respond to this work after the first book was published in '04 is they would respond by email, right? They respond by email, send a quick note saying thank you. Or they would respond by commenting on the blog. A lot of people in this room, we met each other through that very process. So you broadcast your body of work and people start to respond. Then the question is, what do we do in return? So let me share with you what I've done. I'm not sharing this with you as a prescription necessarily, because this is not a scientific method. I'm just trying to analyze what's happened, and I want to share with you a couple of stories and some of the repercussions of this in a positive sense. I respond to them personally in two significant ways. If somebody sends me an email, and I'm going to let me preface this with a little caveat. I don't claim to have a perfect record with this. I mean, there are things that fall through the cracks. I have a bit of a backlog, I must say. But whenever I can, I respond personally. Now, if you were to respond, just ask yourself this question. If you were to respond personally to somebody, say, that sent you an email or sent you a tweet of thanks or commented on your blog, how do you typically respond? How do you do it? What do you do? Hit reply, right? Tweet back. And I do that too. But whenever possible, I respond personally by picking up the phone and calling them. And I'm telling you guys that every major thing that's going on in my business right now, and I'll share a little bit of that with you, and these are significant things that have happened in my business world, I can trace back to a call that I made to somebody who had responded to me. For example, the first really significant email that I got after The Radical Leap came out in '04 was a long, essentially a diatribe from a principal, an elementary school principal in Jacksonville, Florida, a guy named David Pinter. He sent me this long email to say, I read The Radical Leap. It's made a huge difference in my school. It's helped me to build a culture around here. It's changed the dynamic of the school. The kids are having a better experience. The parents are having a better experience. We're getting more support from the community. I run this school in a way that we love coming to work every day, and I'm just writing to tell you that this has made a huge difference for me. Thank you for writing this book. Do you have any plans to bring this into the field of education in any way? So I called him. Now, I know that he wasn't expecting it because I got his secretary on the phone, and I said, yeah, I'm looking for Mr. Pinter. So he's gone for the day. I said, okay. Well, you just tell him that Steve Farber called. Here's his cell phone. Here's his home phone. Because it turns out everybody in the school had read the book, right? So I got him on the phone, and I'm telling you, I'm not exaggerating this. This guy, he did not shut up for 40 minutes. And he went on and on and on and on about how important this work is for the field of education. And what are you doing to bring this into the field of education? You got to bring this in. You got to spend more time with educators. Now, please understand, I'm passionate about education, but this had never crossed my mind. It wasn't on my radar screen. I had never intended it. But that first conversation with David got me thinking about educators, and it's grown into something pretty significant. One phone call. I'll give you another example. I was speaking at a conference. This wasn't too long ago, and it was kind of an association meeting, lots of different companies there. And one of the folks in the group came up to me afterwards. She said, "I just wanted to let you know that I run a sales team, and I don't have their permission to give names and all that. So I'm just going to say a multinational company, right? I run a sales team. My top salesperson, her name is Vicki." That's her real name. I'm just not going to share her last name with you at this point. I will at some point. She said, "Vicki is my top salesperson. We have come to call her the original love doctor because she read the book and it's made some significant changes for her." So typically what I would have done, I have to say, in the past is I would have said, "That's really cool. Thank you. You made my day. That's terrific." But in this case, what I said to her was, "Awesome. Can you give me her cell phone number?" So she did. And we kind of conspired so it would be a surprise for Vicki. So I called her up about a week later, and she answered the phone. I said, "Hi, is this the original Love Doctor?" And she said, "Who is this? Who is this?" I said, what are you wearing?" No,
That's not creepy.
yeah, no, not at all, not at all. It's all about who it comes from. It's not yet. So I, we got to talking, and I said, "So tell me, what is this all about? Where'd you get that moniker?" And she said, "Listen," she said, "I started thinking about this love thing, and I asked myself, do my customers love me? Do they love me?" And she explained to me that her customers are big time, right? So she sells to major, worldwide chains. So when she sells something, it goes into chains all across the U.S. and various parts of the world. She said, I asked myself the question, do my customers love me? And the honest, brutally honest answer that I got back from myself was no. They don't love me. They like me. They like me a lot. We traveled together, we know each other pretty well, but they don't love me. So I went on a campaign, she explained to me, to get my customers to love me. I said, "Well, that's cool. How'd you do that?" And she said, "Well, I got to tell you that some of it's a little controversial." She said, I presented this several times to some of my colleagues, and so it just doesn't work for some people. But she said, "Here's the thing. First of all, what I realized was that if I'm going to get my customers to love me, which can sound kind of manipulative on the surface," she said, "the first thing I realized was that I have to give myself permission to love them. I have to love them. And then it's going to be natural and it's going to be reciprocal." So I allowed myself to love my customers and to treat them as loved ones. So what do you do with loved ones? You learn about them, right? You learn about their families, you know their stories, you know their challenges, you know their lives. And she said, "And what do you do when you walk into a room and you see somebody that you haven't seen for a while, somebody that you love? What do you do? What happens here?" "A lot at SOBCon," parenthetically he asked. "Yeah, you hug. You hug them, you kiss them. That's what you do to people who love." She said, "I hug my customers, I kiss my customers, I know their families, and they love me." And it turns out that over the course of a couple of years, they started to love me back. Pretty cool, right? Now remember, she's a salesperson. Bottom line, I'm not making this figure up. It increased her sales revenue by $100 million. $100 million. Now remember, she's talking about big volumes and all that. I don't care. That's still a pretty significant number, at least the way I do math. So I share that story with you because I would not have gotten that story had I not picked up the phone and called her. Make the call. Every business opportunity that I'm facing right now started with a phone call like that. The other way is to reach out. You don't have not just reaching out with by picking up the phone, but it's reaching out by investing in the people in your network, right? Now here's the thing, and again, this is why I wanted to share with you, to start out by sharing with you the essence of my body of work. The idea behind this is not to call a person in order to figure out what the next sales opportunity is with that person, right? It's not to call that person to say, "I'm going to get in good so I can, I can start selling on my next program." Listen, I'm just going to explain to you what my experience is. Maybe you'll have the same experience, maybe you won't. But if somebody takes the time to write to me in whatever the format is, and it's heartfelt, and it's genuine, and it's real, I love that. And I love them for it. So the main reason that I'm calling to connect with them is to express my gratitude. That's it. That's what it's about. And, honestly, truly, honestly, this is the way I make friends nowadays. And I made some tremendous friends. So the impulse behind this is really critical, right? The impulse to make the call is because it just seems like a natural thing to do. It's heart to heart. But the other way to do that, once you start, making those relationships and connecting with people, is to reach out personally by investing in that person, right? By investing yourself in another person or people in your network. So I've found that just quite naturally, I've taken a personal interest in a lot of the people that I've met. I'll give you a SOBCon example. Hey, JJ. Where is he? Where'd he go? Did he leave the room? Bastard. How many of you have met JJ French? Okay, so listen. JJ is the founder and manager for and business guy behind and guitarist for the iconic rock band Twisted Sister, right? So I met JJ a couple of years ago here at SOBCon, and we got, there he is, and take a bow, and we got to talking, and one of the things that I learned about him, I heard him speak on a panel, and I heard this dude can talk, and he's got great stories to tell, and he's really smart, and he shared with me that one of the things that he wants to do is to do what I do, that he wants to speak, and he sees this as the next phase in his life, the next phase in his career. And we really, there was a really good connection there. So my impulse, bless you, my impulse is to start to ask myself the question, what can I do? What can I do to help? Not because I'm trying to get something out of him, not because I wanted access to his unbelievable vintage guitar collection, which I did get, by the way. But because I felt that I can help. I felt that his desire was lining up with what I happen to have some expertise in, right? And by the way, when I shared with him what I just shared with you about how I call people, that reach out to me, he wasn't very comfortable with that idea. I have to admit. He said, you got to be careful. There are crazy people out there. So, I mean, here's the thing. I have a business called Extreme Leadership, where the foundation is do what you love and the service of people what you do. You got a business called Twisted Sister, where people listen to songs like We're Not Gonna Take It and Love Is for Suckers. So, you're going to get different people when you call, I suspect, than I do. So, you got to temper it like that. But in any case, so the personal investment, we've been talking for a couple of years and just been coaching however I can, but this Extreme Leadership Summit that Terry mentioned that's coming up in August in San Diego, first person I thought of, and this is the first public event that I've ever done, the first person that I thought of to be one of the speakers at that conference was JJ French. So here's his opportunity to put his mouth on the line, as it were. Now, I share that with you again to say the principle behind it is reach out as people respond to your body of work. They're responding because you touch them in some way, right? As they respond to you, if you reach back out in as personal a way as you can, watch what happens to the nature of the relationships that you begin to build. And then the next step, and again, this is just something that I've done, and I've done it quite naturally. Here's the thinking behind it. If you reach out to me because something in this work resonates with you, and you reach out to me because something in this work resonates with you, and you reach out to me for the same reason, chances are pretty good that you guys are going to really enjoy each other. So the next step is to introduce the people that you respond to each other. You really need to talk to, I just had a conversation, you guys should really talk because you have some good notes to share and you can learn from each other because you're trying to put the same principles into practice. So I mentioned David Pinter to you before. So I talked to David Pinter, the principal of, he's now principal of Fort Caroline Elementary School in Jacksonville, Florida. I had a similar conversation a couple of months after I talked to David Pinter with Jim Whipke. Jim Whipke is at the time was a principal of a middle school in St. Louis. Then I had a conversation with Glenn Warren, who was in Orange County, who was working for the Orange County Department of Education. And all separate conversations. Again, they had all reached out to me separately. I reached back to them with the phone call. We started talking. I said, you guys need to talk to each other. They started to have a conversation with each other. And as a result of that, this network has started to build. And these guys, I'm telling you, this is again, I think it's the right choice of words. These guys fell in love with each other. They fell in love with each other. And then I met Jill Shulin, and I met Mike McDonough from Ohio. And the community has grown. This is in the education world. Again, remember, a world that I never set out to have anything to do with. These people started to talk to each other and help each other out. And as that grew, they began to come back to me and said, began asking, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to help us out with getting the word out about your stuff. So this is what happened next. I began to ask them how I can help. Now again, you see the difference here, right? Because the impulse is to say, all right, hey, there's this great community out here. You're all interested in my stuff, so let me see what I can get you to do for me. If I have a weakness in this area, it's in that question. I have to admit, I still have a hard time asking people to help me out. But what I love, and I can get better at that, but what I love doing is asking them, you know, how I can help further their relationships and how I can help them in whatever their mission is, which chances are is going to be based around my mission. So let me tell you how this has kind of played out and what it's led to. Because I remember I started out by saying that every major business opportunity that I'm heading into right now started with one phone call. In February, in San Diego, I was invited to join a task force in the city that was started by the superintendent of the San Diego County Office of Education, along with other superintendents in San Diego County and several business people in San Diego County. They were all passionate about education. They had a task force called Transforming Education. And because there had been an interest in my work in education, they invited me to join the task force and see how I could contribute. So here's the way that I could contribute. And this wasn't my idea. Somebody else kind of came up with this, but they thought, hey, why don't we do this? Let's have an event. Let's have an event here in San Diego that shines the light on what's happening, the good things that are happening here in the field of education. This will be an opportunity to really mobilize the community. We'll invite teachers, we'll invite parents, we'll invite business people, we'll invite the whole community to come together for an evening to celebrate education and to get people energized. So we thought, hey, why don't we do this? Let's call it Re-Energize Education. So we ended up building the whole theme of the evening around the Radical Leap, and we gave a copy of the Radical Leap. The idea was to give a copy of the Radical Leap Re-Energized to everybody that came. I'd give a keynote speech. Then we'd have a panel discussion of educators from around the country who had been putting these ideas into practice. So who do you think those panelists were? David Pinter, Jim Whipke, Jill Schulen, Glenn Warren, Mike McDonough. They came from all around the country. And I stood up there, I gave my spiel about the Radical Leap. We had the panel discussion. We had a showcase of all these great things that were going on in San Diego. We did it on the USS Midway in San Diego because the superintendent of San Diego happens to sit on their board of directors. It was his idea. Want to have an event? Let's do a big event. I've got a barn. You've got a ship. I've got a battleship. Let's do it there. It's a great. Let's put on a show. That's basically what it was. And this is a beautiful venue. So we were thinking, we started this thing out thinking, if we can get 200-300 people, wouldn't that be awesome? We ended up having 800 people at this thing. 800 people. Now, that started with a phone call in 2004 to a guy named David Pinter, who is a principal of an elementary school. So what I'm suggesting to you is this. And then there are a couple of other caveats. The summit came out of that as well, and all this stuff that I'm doing now in public events and certification and all that started with a phone call somewhere. Broadcast your body of work, respond personally, introduce people to each other, and then ask how you can help. That's all I did in San Diego. How can I help? Well, why don't you come and put on a show? Okay, I can do that. Your body of work is different from mine. It's not about the content of it. It's about the value of it. If the value is there, and none of us would be here if we weren't creating things of value, right? If the value is there, it's going to draw people to you, and the network will build, the community will build. Now, let me finish it up with this, okay? This idea, for example, of picking up the phone and calling, this idea of making a personal investment, for some people, this is not an easy thing to do. This is a very uncomfortable thing to even consider. So the question I'd like you to ask yourself is this. Again, I'm not suggesting, I'm not offering this to you as a prescription, as a homework assignment. I'm just sharing my experience with you. All right. The question you got to ask yourself is, do I really want to do this? I like the idea, but do I really want to do this? And if the answer, if you're honest, this is not a leading question, all right? This is not a question that I'm expecting you to answer in the affirmative. Answer it honestly. It's a question that demands to be answered honestly. If your honest answer to this question is, do I really want to do this stuff? If the honest answer is no, that's cool. That's fine. I hope you've been grossly over-entertained for the last half hour. And I don't mean that to sound snide, even though I guess it did. But if the answer is yes, then how do we prove to ourselves that we're really doing it? If the answer is yes, let me just caution you about what the experience feels like. What the experience might feel like the first time you pick up that phone and make that first call that you've never made before. This is what comes down to what I refer to as the pursuit of the OSM. Many of you are familiar with this. I'm going to proceed as if you're not, okay? So the OSM, this falls into the greatest hits category. The OSM, I want to explain by way of metaphor. We'll start out with this. This is a picture of Jimmy Shea. Jimmy Shea won the gold medal in the 2002 Winter Olympics in the skeleton event. For those of you that happen to miss skeleton, let me describe it for you. It's an example of an extreme sport, right? It's like extreme luge, as if that weren't extreme enough to begin with. It takes place on that same kind of ridiculous track, right? The difference is, as you can kind of see here from the picture, is the skeleton board, first of all, it's a little thing. It's like the size of a roasting pan. They lie down on their stomachs on this thing, and they go head first, down the mountain with the chin about 6 inches off of the ice as they're screaming down the mountain at like 1,000,000 miles an hour. So you can imagine what happens if you wipe out doing this thing, right? Not a pretty sight. This is why it's called an extreme sport. These people are extremely nuts. So I'm not suggesting that you have to take up skeleton in order to understand what I'm talking about here, but imagine for a moment that you wanted to. You saw it on TV, you thought it looked pretty cool, so you figure you're going to give it a try for yourself. So you go out, you get your equipment together, get yourself a roasting pan, steal your kid's bicycle helmet, and the day finally arrives where you're ready to take on the mountain. So visualize the scene, okay? You're approaching the track from down below, and you're checking out the angle of this thing. And from down here anyway, yeah, it looks challenging, but from down here, the main thing you're thinking is, this is going to be awesome, right? And then you take the lift up to the top of the mountain. Now you're at the top of the mountain, and you got your board in your hand, and for the first time, you step up to the edge of the track, and for the first time, you look down. Is it any different from up here? Is the angle any different from up here? Yeah, what's the angle like from up here? There isn't any angle. There's no angle. It's a straight drop into the abyss, man. So now, let's just say you're having second thoughts. So your hands are starting to shake on the board, sweat's breaking on your forehead, your heart's beating in your chest, you're having trouble catching your breath. Really what you want to do is walk back down the mountain, but everybody's looking at you, so you can't do that. So you give yourself a little pep talk. You say, right, I'm just going to try this out. I'll try it out for a couple minutes, see how it goes. So you get yourself into position, you're teetering on the edge, and finally you take a deep breath, you push off, and before you know it, bang! You're going 1,000,000 miles an hour, and you suddenly realize that you are now 100% committed to this idea, all right? There is no turning back now, and typically at that point in the process, there are two words that come to mind. What are they? Oh, shit. That's them. Nice job, class. Nicely done. So M stands for moment, right? Now here's the idea, and this is what it's a very simple thing, and it's something you know from your own experience. The OSM is a natural thing. The OSM is a natural, built-in indicator that we have as human beings that we are doing or about to do something that has extraordinary potential. You know this from your own experience. Anytime you've taken on a challenge that intellectually, rationally, you knew was going to be good for you, but it was something you hadn't done before, or something that stretched you a little bit, as much as you believed in it and quote-unquote wanted to do it rationally, tell me there was no OSM there. It's a natural part of the process. Or anytime you've made a commitment to another human being, right? When you start building this kind of a community, this kind of a network, it's a very significant personal commitment, right? When you make a commitment to another human being, as much as you believed in the commitment, as much as you believed in that other person or loved that other person, when it came time to step up to your actions, tell me there was no OSM there. It's natural. It's just a natural part of the human condition, is it not? Here's a very simple example. How many of you are married? Okay, think back for a moment to your wedding day. Tell me there was no OSM on your wedding day. Listen, I get it. It's the love of your life and all that. I understand. But you tell me that when you were saying I do, you weren't also thinking, oh, shit. I mean, tell me that wasn't happening. It's a natural experience. I've had that experience twice, as a matter of fact. I know it's true. It's a natural part of the human condition. So what I'm suggesting to you is this. If the only reason you can think of to not do these ideas, to not reach out personally, to not connect people with each other, to not put yourself into the game, if the only reason you can think of to not do that is because the idea scares you, then that's the reason to do it. That's what I mean by the pursuit of the OSM. Jimmy Shea described this experience beautifully. I saw him interview the day after he won the gold medal. He said it like this. The question was, do you remember the first time you ever tried the skeleton thing? He said, oh yeah, I remember the first time I went down this run, I was going way too fast, and I realized I just made the biggest mistake in my life. But when I got to the bottom, I couldn't wait to get back up and do it again. And that's the nature of the OSM. In the moment, sometimes it feels wrong. And sometimes the OSM is a sign that something is wrong, but oftentimes it's actually a sign that something is right. So if the only reason you could think of to not try these ideas or any of the other ideas that we've talked about here in the last day and a half or so is because the idea scares you, then that's the reason to do it. Thanks much, folks.
Steve Farber, everybody.
Oh, I love you.
I love you, man.
Certainly.
No, yes, please.
How do I stay organized? Man, are you asking the wrong person?
You can say Terry's going to talk about that at 3:15.
I'm sorry, say again.
How do you keep track of all these people and know when to connect, when to follow up, and when to call?
Okay, so the question is, how do I keep track of all these people and know when to connect, when to follow up, when to call? The truthful answer is I'm really not very good at it. So that's what I said earlier. Things fall through the cracks. I don't have a 100% track record on this. I need to get better on it. But what I do is I keep a file in my Outlook. I mean, basically, that's what I do. And I just have a file for it. And when I have extra time, I start going through the file. I read their emails, their phone number. If they've connected with me through the website, and they filled out the contact form, their phone number's in there. It's easy. If they haven't, there's this cool thing. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called Google. And it's amazing how fast you can find somebody's business phone number, and which is even more fun, actually, if they didn't give me their phone number and I still call them. So that's how I keep track of it. Outlook, basically.